Because my scene was it was ballads. I mean, I came out of junior high school, I learned how to play the ukulele. In high school, I picked up the guitar. All of a sudden, all that stuff washed away. I cried a lot.
Two icons booked the same Los Angeles studio for what journalists predicted would be folk music's Sistine Chapel. Instead, it became a cold operating theater where collaboration lay on the slab. From the first take, Paul Simon treated every suggestion like background noise, something to be dialed down, never dialed in. Joan offered harmony lines. He clipped them mid-phrase. She proposed rhythmic shifts. He countered with surgeon-level edits, no anesthetic. But the scalpel cut deepest when he asked her to rewrite a song she'd birthed in the ashes of personal tragedy. He spoke of tightening the narrative, as if grief were just a chorus that ran too long. Her voice faltered. For a heartbeat, she was no longer the woman who had stared down dictators. She was simply invisible. Pride kept her spine straight as she packed her guitar and left. Simon didn't chase, didn't wave, didn't even pause the metronome. Silence sealed the session like a tomb. Years later, she confided to a friend, "I've stood beside men who took lives for conscience, yet this man made me question my own existence." Betrayal number 4 carried no jeers or cameras, but its echo followed her into every empty green room thereafter. And then came the coldest cut of all, the note never sung, the friendship never born. To fans flipping through glossy magazines, Joan Baez and Joni Mitchell looked like sister constellations, two golden troubadours lighting the counterculture sky. The reality? A polar vortex in silk and denim. Their first backstage meeting in 1968 revealed the temperature. Joan approached, all warmth and welcome. Joni barely glanced up, offered a nod chilled enough to frost the dressing room mirror. The true sting arrived later at a private gathering. Between sips of wine and tales of touring woes, Joni dismissed Joan's vibrato as churchy, a single word, featherlight yet razor sharp. No headline screamed it, no columnist dissected it. The cruelty of the moment was its intimacy. Oh, dismissal whispered too low for microphones, yet loud enough to echo for decades. What followed wasn't feud but frost. Festival lineups placed them side by side. The photo pits captured twin smiles. The second the flash died, so did the connection. No collaborations, no late-night jams, only the hush of two paths that refused to braid. For Joan, that hush carried the weight of every friendship that might have bloomed but never dared. There were no fiery exchanges, no betrayed causes, just the ache of possibility turned to ice. And sometimes the wound you feel the deepest is the handshake that never happens. Number 5 wrote itself in invisible ink, legible only to the heart that keeps rereading silence. Bob Dylan taught her that even prophets can forget the hands that lifted them. David Crosby proved harmony means nothing when sharpened into a punchline. Jerry Rubin showed how revolution, without empathy, curdles into ego. Paul Simon revealed that erasure can hurt more than ridicule. Joni Mitchell reminded her that absence can wound louder than accusation. 5 betrayals might have shattered a lesser spirit. Joan Baez carried them the way she carried every tear-gassed note. High, clear, undefeated. She still believes in peace, still believes a guitar can outsing a gun. But tonight, at 84, she finally lets the ledger breathe. Because naming a betrayal isn't bitterness, it's exhaling. And as the last name leaves her lips, the chord she strikes is not of vengeance, but release. A ringing reminder that integrity, once earned, survives every silence. Joan Baez never needed pyrotechnics, designer gowns, or stadium-shaking drum solos to command attention. She walked on stage with only a guitar and a voice as clear as cathedral bells, and entire crowds fell silent. Her songs fueled sit-ins, anti-war marches, and prison hunger strikes. Yet for more than half a century, a different silence hung over her legacy. A hush surrounding 5 names she refused to sing beside. 5 encounters that carved scars deeper than any night in a county jail. Today, at 84, the saintly songbird of the 60s finally exhales the truth. She is done shielding the world from the shadows behind her halo. These are not tabloid feuds or petty jealousies. They are turning points that rewrote her. Art, her activism, and her heart. Keep listening because each name reveals a piece of history we thought we knew, until Joan exposed what really happened when the microphone switched off and the hotel doors clicked shut. And if you think the first betrayal is shocking, just wait until you hear the quiet war between two women everyone assumed were sisters in song. But let's begin where every folk rock love story once began. The night a shy Minnesota poet met the woman who would launch him into legend. It was 1961. Dim lights, cigarette haze, and half-finished coffees at Gerda's Folk City in Greenwich Village. Joan, already the reigning princess of the folk revival, spotted a lanky 20-year-old with a borrowed guitar and a notebook bursting, with half-rhymed protest lines. She saw raw genius. He saw an open door to a ready-made audience. Within months, they were inseparable on stage and inseparable off it. Two kindred spirits busking for bus fare, harmonizing at civil rights rallies, finishing each other's verses. She has marched through tear gas with nothing but a guitar. She has faced riot shields armed only with harmony. To millions, Joan Baez is the voice of mercy, the unshakable nightingale of every righteous crowd. Yet for more than half a century, she guarded a private ledger, 5 names, 5 wounds, etched so deep they nearly stole her song. Tonight, she unseals that ledger. Not to settle scores, but to reveal the hidden cost of keeping faith while the world trades it away. Because sometimes the loudest protest isn't a chant. It's the moment you finally say the names you swore you'd never say aloud, and the first name once lived in her heart like scripture. Long before stadium lights crowned him a prophet, Bob Dylan was a rumpled drifter with verses nobody understood, and Joan Baez understood them first. She whisked him from Greenwich dives onto global stages, lent him her halo, her audience, even her hotel room floor when he couldn't afford one. Audiences who came for Joan stayed to hear the skinny kid rasping about winds of change. Radio, stations that worshipped her pure vibrato suddenly spun his gravel-rough drawl. But fame is a shapeshifter. By 1965, the boy who whispered poems in coffee houses wore dark glasses like armor and spoke through locked doors. He booked a world tour, her tour, without so much as a thank you, erasing her name from the poster where his once had fit neatly beneath hers. No phone call, no see you down the road. Just a tour bus that roared off without a backward glance. Then Newport shattered everything. Folk purists gasped when Dylan plugged in. Joan gasped when he cut the cord that tethered them together. He sneered at protest songs in interviews, songs they'd penned knee to knee, dismissing her pacifism as pretty background noise. The crowd debated electric versus acoustic. Joan tasted electric betrayal. She tried to swallow it with grace. She joined him on stage one last night in London, hoping the old alchemy might flicker back. He muttered through introductions, kept his back half turned, treated her harmonies like unwanted echoes. After the encore, he walked straight past, a shadow vanishing into black leather and bodyguards. For Joan, that final silence was louder than any boo that ever rained across a picket line. Still, she kept marching, guitar slung high, but the boy she'd lifted into daylight became the first ghost on her secret list. Yet the sting of betrayal only sharpened when a friend mocked her in front of television millions. Laurel Canyon in the late 60s smelled of eucalyptus and revolution. Harmonies drifted from every porch, outrage crackled on every newspaper. David Crosby floated through it all like a crowned jester, silver tongue, lion mane, guitar chords that could melt granite. Joan admired the voice, tolerated the ego, trusted the politics. That trust combusted on live national TV. It was a 1970 telethon for anti-war prisoners, beamed into living rooms already raw from nightly casualty counts. Joan prepared to deliver a lullaby for hope. Before the stage manager could cue her, Crosby lunged to the mic, cigarette smoke looping around his grin. He launched a joke about performers who strummed safely while others bled, never naming her but carving her silhouette so precisely. The studio lights might as well have spelled B-A-E-Z. Laughter erupted. Cameras cut to Joan's poised smile, but viewers missed the tremor ripping through her chest. She sang anyway, every note steady, every syllable laced with quiet fire. Backstage, She wept not from humiliation, but from revelation. Some comrades wear feathers in their caps and knives in their laughter. Crosby's quip wasn't activism, it was theater played for ratings. That night, Joan drew a line invisible to fans, yet ironclad to her heart. No interview, no harmony, no encore beside the man who confused mockery with movement, but scorched. Earth rhetoric would hit even harder when a radical turned the protest stage into his personal coliseum. Chicago, 1969. The city's heartbeat thundered beneath 100,000 feet, demanding an end to war. Joan stood backstage polishing a final chord, ready to slip calm into chaos. Enter Jerry Rubin, co-founder of the Yippies' bullhorn incarnate. His name rattled FBI dossiers and dorm rooms alike. He thrived on gasoline-soaked rhetoric and the roar of any crowd big enough to echo his name back at him. Without warning, he seized the microphone meant for her song and detonated a tirade. So-called peace singers hiding behind acoustic guitars while real rebels risked jail and bullets. The insult sprayed wide, but landed squarely on Joan's shoulders. Cheers rose, cameras flashed, Rubin basked like Caesar at the Colosseum. Joan stepped forward when he finally surrendered the stage. She could have answered venom with venom. Instead, she delivered her ballad, soft, defiant, unforgettable, then walked off into the Midwestern night, fists unclenched yet soul aflame. In that moment, she understood. Rubin's revolution was less about ending war than feeding an ego that mistook applause for progress. She finished the tour, but never again would she lend her presence to someone who wielded compassion as a punchline. Betrayal number 3 etched itself beside Dylan and Crosby, deeper than tear gas ever burned her lungs. And still, a subtler wound awaited, one inflicted far from rallies, inside a studio where music should have healed. Joan carried him. She added his name to her concert posters when few attendees could pronounce it. She dragged club owners out of smoky back rooms and made them listen to his unpolished croak. She even introduced him to her parents, an intimacy she had granted no other young man swaying through her orbit. Their duets electrified Newport, Berkeley, Birmingham. Reporters nicknamed them the Romeo and Juliet of righteous rebellion. Then fame came roaring like a freight train. Columbia Records, magazine covers, European tours, glamour that had never excited Joan, but wrapped Dylan in velvet isolation. He swapped coffee shops for limousines, traded protest lines for impressionistic riddles, and began wearing sunglasses indoors, even backstage. At first, Joan rationalized the changes. He was evolving, protecting his fragile muse. But an icy pattern emerged. Calls unanswered, letters unopened, rehearsal passes revoked. The death blow landed in May 1965. Dylan announced an international tour, and to Joan's shock, she wasn't on the bill. No conversation, no apology, just absence. She swallowed the hurt, bought her own ticket to London, and slipped into the wings hoping to sing harmony on one song, only to learn her pass had been downgraded to guest, not performer. The boy who once scribbled love poems on napkins now kept her behind rope lines like any other fan. 2 months later at Newport, Dylan went electric, enraging folk purists. But while headlines screamed about volumes and amplifiers, Joan heard a different dissonance, the final severing of their shared crusade. On television, he even joked, "Joan's still singing the same 3 chords, bless her heart." That quip landed harder than any booing crowd. From that day, Joan looked at packed arenas and saw a warning. Even revolutionaries can sell out, and even poets can freeze the warmest heart. Yet Dylan was only the first name etched on her blacklist. Another voice, smooth as velvet, sharp as a switchblade, would turn admiration into quiet fury the very next decade. Laurel Canyon, 1967. The neighborhood smelled of eucalyptus, fresh vinyl, and limitless possibility. Joan drifted from house to house, trusting the open-door policy of musicians who believed art should be communal. Enter David Crosby, part bird, part pirate, armed with harmonies that felt like sunshine and a wit that could slice titanium. He charmed her with stories of sailing, psilocybin visions, and a utopia where music dismantled empires. She believed every word, until she heard how he wielded that wit on live television. April 24, 1970. a coast-to-coast anti-war special. Joan planned to sing Prison Trilogy, honoring inmates of conscience. Cameras rolled, Crosby scheduled. To introduce her, instead gleefully ad-libbed, "Some people sing about prisons, some actually change laws. Guess which one Joan does?" Laughter erupted. Joan walked on stage, spine straight, voice steady, but inside she felt a vein of ice crack her sternum. She finished, bowed, and left the studio without speaking to him. The insult was not a joke. It was a public erasure of her arrests, her Vietnam tax protests, her entire non-violent philosophy. Crosby later apologized if she was offended, a phrase Joan considered the vocabulary of cowardice. She quietly erased his phone number, declined every panel or benefit that listed him, and sang Prison Trilogy at the next show with a new edge that made audiences weep. To outsiders, it looked like nothing. Two celebrities scheduling conflicts. Inside Joan's mind, Crosby became proof that a peace sign can double as camouflage for egos the size of stadiums. She still loved his harmonies, but she refused to let his name hitchhike on her principles. And yet, compared with the next betrayal, Crosby's jab felt almost polite. Because in Chicago, the microphone turned into a Molotov cocktail, and a revolutionary icon hurled it straight at Joan's heart. If the 60s were a storm, Jerry Rubin was the thunderclap. Co-founder of the Yippies, mastermind of headline-grabbing street theater, Rubin measured success in column inches and FBI files. Joan admired his courage from afar, until August 1969. Grant Park overflowed with 50,000 protesters. Joan tuned her guitar, ready to soothe the crowd before tempers ignited. Rubin swaggered to the mic first. Eyes blazing, he berated, "Guitar-strumming pacifists who lull us to sleep while babies burn." The audience roared. Joan froze. He meant her. Cameras caught her expression. Not shock, but something more dangerous, resolve cooling into granite. She performed anyway, voice a whisper-turned whirlwind, then slipped away unseen. That evening in her hotel, she made a vow, never again. Would she share a stage with a man who viewed compassion as weakness? When organizers begged her to reconcile, unity. "Joan, think of the movement," she replied. "Unity built on contempt crumbles faster than tyranny." Over time, Rubin reinvented himself as a stockbroker, proving Joan's private suspicion. Some radicals trade megaphones for money clips the minute the flashbulbs dim. Her refusal to duel him publicly baffled gossip writers. It denied them spectacle. But for Joan, silence was not surrender. It was an impenetrable shield. Still, the studio can wound as brutally as any protest rally. In 1978, Joan walked into what should have been a historic duet session, only to learn that technical brilliance can mask the coldest condescension. Picture an LA studio scented with fresh coffee and $20,000 condenser microphones. Paul Simon, pocket-sized titan of meticulous songwriting, stood behind the glass, arms folded. He invited Joan to collaborate on 3 tracks, promising a meeting of legends. At take 1, she delivered a soaring harmony. Simon clicked the "Pause talkback" button. "You're a hair sharp. And can we rework that lyric? It's a bit on the nose." She tried again, and again. By take 7, his sighs filled the control room louder than her guitar. Then the unthinkable. He suggested altering a line she wrote after attending the funeral of a civil rights volunteer. Joan's breath caught. She asked for a short break, stepped outside, and felt the weight of every jail cell she'd slept in, for justice. None of those walls had ever made her feel smaller than this fluorescent studio. When she re-entered, she didn't argue. She simply packed her guitar, thanked the engineer, and walked into the California twilight. Simon never chased her. Years later, a journalist asked about the abandoned session. Joan answered only, "Brilliance without kindness is just another form of noise." From then on, she kept her recording spaces gentle, democratic, sacred. She would happily sing backup for novices at benefit concerts, but she would not surrender her grief, her tempo, or her dignity for anyone's platinum record. Yet the coldest betrayal was neither a public scolding nor a studio power play. It was a never-spoken frost that drifted between two towering women, both hailed as queens, both determined not to kneel to the other. Fans dreamt of a Baez-Mitchell supergroup, two soprano larks weaving harmonies strong enough to topple dictatorships. Reality was an Arctic front sliding across green fields. Their first proper meeting, Boston, March 1968, lasted 90 seconds. Joan extended her hand. Joni glanced, nodded, and returned to tuning her dulcimer. No malice, just frosty disinterest. Weeks. Later, a critic quoted Mitchell describing Baez's voice as too churchy, lacking pain. The word spread through folk circles like wildfire. Joan never officially responded, yet friends noticed she stopped covering both sides now in her encores. Invitations went unanswered, tributes politely declined. When producers of the last waltz begged both women to share the finale, Joan agreed, on condition Joni sang first, left the stage, and kept a respectful distance. Joni consented with equal precision. There was no screaming backstage, no flung wine glasses. Their feud was an exquisite stalemate, two monarchs acknowledging the other's crown while refusing to share a throne. For decades, photographers tried to catch them in the same frame. They rarely succeeded. And whenever interviewers nudged, Joan would smile, "I respect her immensely," then change the subject. What stung wasn't rivalry. Joan admired Joni's restless inventiveness. It was condescension, the sense that her decades of civil rights marches were a footnote beside Mitchell's restless search for harmonic perfection. Joan could forgive a broken promise, a cheap insult, even a public humiliation. She could not forgive disdain disguised as coolness. 5 names. 5 open wounds that finally scabbed over, not through revenge, but through deliberate neglect. Joan Baez never penned a diss track, never lobbed a late-night tweet storm, never auctioned private letters to the highest-bidding tabloid. She reclaimed her power by withholding the one resource every antagonist craved, her spotlight. When Dylan's anthology skipped her contributions, she recorded Diamonds and Rust, a masterpiece that immortalized her heartbreak without naming him. Once, when Crosby crowed, she funneled fury into hunger strikes for draft resistors. When Rubin mocked, she redoubled prison visitation efforts. When Simon's control bruised her, she founded her own label for marginalized voices. And when Joni's frost bit deepest, Joan thawed strangers' hearts from Vietnam to Venezuela with lullabies about mercy. In the end, she did what no critic, lover, or rival ever expected. She outlasted them all, not in chart positions, but in moral stamina. Every time she was shoved to the background, she turned that background into a pulpit. Every silence she endured became a blank stanza she filled with justice. So why break her vow of secrecy now? Because time grants perspective, and confession grants peace. By naming the betrayals, Joan Baez reminds us that dissent is messy, camaraderie, fragile, and heroes painfully human. Yet she also proves that bitterness need not poison brilliance. You can acknowledge the knife in your back without planting daggers in other people's. You can tell the world exactly who hurt you and still choose music over malice. As the final chord fades, picture her, gray-streaked hair, eyes still bright, with defiant empathy, guitar resting lightly against her heart. She looks at the ghostly bridges she once refused to burn and smiles. They are gone now, ashes on the wind, but her voice remains unyielding, unmistakable, and more powerful than any betrayal could ever hope to silence. Because some artists settle scores with loud guitars, Joan Baez settled hers with quiet, unbreakable grace.